Welcome to the Dipshit Files number 33, and I am Mr. Scriptkeeper.
And I'm Mrs. Scriptkeeper.
And what the hell is the name of this one?
Ooh, this is Orson Welles and War of the Words.
And there's a subtitle too, right?
Yeah, communication might be our greatest weapon.
Is it, though? Might be our greatest downfall. But let's find out on this episode of the Dipshit Files.
October 30th, 1938 was a typical Sunday evening for many people across the United States. Sunday evenings were usually a time to unwind from the weekend and relax before another busy week of work and school began. In a Depression-era America, there was no better way to do this than to settle into a comfortable chair or sofa and turn on the radio set.
Okay, something like that. Similar.
These were tense times of unemployment and uncertainty, with bad luck around every corner. Many hard-working Americans had already lost their jobs and even their homes when the Great Depression had started 9 years prior. And those on the East Coast, from New York through New England, had been blindsided just the previous month by one of the most destructive and powerful hurricanes in recorded history. A hurricane that killed 700 people and destroyed thousands of homes and businesses. And if that wasn't enough to keep a person up at night with worry and anxiety, there was also a war brewing in Europe. Yeah. And a seemingly unstoppable dictator named Adolf Hitler, who had been steadily strengthening Germany's military, invading Austria the previous March, and pushing into Czechoslovakia in early October.
Dick.
Too many Americans remembered all too well the chaos and destruction that World War I had caused just 20 years before. And now it looked like the world was on the cusp of another battle that would once again tear nations apart and bring death and destruction to everyone's front door. It felt like the world out there was a dark and scary place, and people needed a distraction just so they could keep going. In the Roaring 20s, there'd been plenty of money and time for going out to dinner and spending an evening at the movies, but once the stock market crashed, most American families didn't have a lot left over for leisurely activities after paying bills. Nearly 1/3 of movie theaters closed between the years of 1929 and 1934.
And 100 years later, everything's better and fine.
So people chose to stay home, amusing themselves with board games like Scrabble and Monopoly, and, of course, listening to the radio.
SKATCAST.
In 1916, radios were selling for between $35 and $200, a steep price. But by the early 30s, the price had dropped to an average of $10, and therefore most middle-class American families owned one by 1938. And the radio not only provided a distraction from the current state of the world, but it also filled the much-needed gap of social interaction, with neighbors often gathering in one home to listen to their favorite programs together. The radio was so important to American life in the 30s that, quote, while movie houses closed, nightclubs languished, and theatrical stock companies disappeared, radio boomed. Thousands of families who had purchased much of their household equipment on credit gave up their vacuum cleaners, their cars, and their furniture, but kept up payments on their radios, end quote. They would listen to music, but there were also radio programs performed live by actors in a studio. If you were in the mood for comedy, you could tune in every week to the Amos and Andy Show. If you were feeling like a soap opera love-type story, you could listen to Our Gal Sunday, a serialized story of a small-town girl who falls in love with a wealthy Englishman.
Just a small-town girl.
For those who needed a little drama in their lives, The Lone Ranger and The Shadow were sure to satisfy.
Yeah, see?
And young children could tune in and listen to the adventures of Little Orphan Annie every week. And for the first time in history, Americans could hear their president's voice in their own homes.
Gross.
Between March of 1933 and June of 1944, Franklin Delano Roosevelt talked conversationally to the American people in what would become known as his fireside chats.
Can you imagine if Donald Trump or Joe Biden were just hanging out, talking like...
No.
I want to tell you about this podcast of mine is huge. It's the hugest of all the ratings.
I can't do the other guy. But there was a guy named Baked Ham, and I had hair on my legs, and then there was a sandwich, and then the fire happened, and then there was...
What?
That's my Joe Biden impression. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Government's great. We're doing great. Go ahead.
In these chats, FDR would acknowledge the challenges of the working person. He would ask that those who felt defeated continue pushing forward, even though it wasn't going to be any easier for quite a while. Because of these broadcasts, people felt that they knew their president a little bit better than maybe he did understand what they were going through as well. They felt seen and heard. They recognized his voice when it came through their radio, and they listened because he brought them comfort. But on this Sunday evening, when people turned on their radios and they settled in, it was not comfort they received, but absolute fucking terror. As usual, it would take a few minutes for the whole family to get together in the living room. Everyone who has kids knows it's like, come on, takes a few minutes.
And you miss the first little bit because you're like, son of a bitch, you couldn't potty 5 minutes ago.
Exactly. So by the time most tuned into the broadcast, it was a few minutes after the hour, and they thought that the entertainment had just not started yet, as they were treated to the sounds of Roman Raquello and his orchestra allegedly playing from the Meridian Room in downtown New York City. But after a few minutes, the voice of a news announcer cut in with a special bulletin. Over the next hour, people all over the country listened in terror as they heard what they thought was genuine and live footage of an alien invasion starting in a little town called Grover's Mill, New Jersey, and moving across the Hudson into the Big Apple.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. At 20 minutes before 8 Central Time, Professor Farrell of the Mount Jennings Observatory, Chicago, Illinois, reports observing several explosions of incandescent gas occurring at regular intervals on the planet Mars. The spectroscope indicates the gas to be hydrogen and moving toward the Earth with enormous velocity. Professor Pearson of the observatory at Princeton confirms Farrell's observation and describes the phenomenon as, quote, like a jet of blue flame shot from a gun, unquote. We now return you to the music of Ramon Raquello, playing for you in the Meridian Room of the Park Plaza Hotel, situated in downtown New York.
Of course, we now know that New Jersey was not being invaded by aliens from Mars. It was just part of a dramatized radio broadcast bringing War of the Worlds, the science fiction masterpiece from H.G. Wells, to life. However, it seems the story was a little too lifelike for some people, and panic ensued.
That's a good skitscat.
Or so we've been told.
Right.
The question is, how did this happen? How did even one person who was listening to a radio show about invading aliens believe that it could possibly be happening in real life? Now, the answer is complicated. It's somewhat silly, but it's very interesting. This is one of those moments in history where a perfect storm of integral people and the decisions that they made came together to create something that can never truly be replicated. So get comfy and let's get this episode fired up.
Yeah. War of the Worlds, more like War of the Words, yeah.
Some people believe that the 1938 radio broadcast of War of the Worlds was a disaster.
Wrong.
Many people agree that it caused chaos, and a lot of people think it was brilliant.
Yep.
I personally am one of those people. Just to get my biases out of the way, I am a person who thinks it was brilliant.
He's a godfather of skitscats, that motherfucker.
And I suppose if you're looking for one person to hold responsible for the disastrous, chaotic, and brilliant War of the Worlds broadcast,
Jesus,
it would be Orson Welles.
Okay.
Now, I'm a big fan of Orson Welles because he lived his life unapologetically and he understood the importance of a story well told.
Boom.
And of course, he could be a little extra at times.
Sounds like it.
Orson Welles was likely one of the most interesting and, well, in my opinion, brilliant minds of our time. George Orson Welles was born in Kenosha, Wisconsin on May 6th, 1915.
Hey.
That's my birthday.
Yeah, except for you're not that old.
No.
You're not 110 or something.
No. But to Richard Wells and Beatrice Ives.
Dick Well. Beatrice. Nice.
Yes. Richard Wells was reportedly an inventor, a successful businessman, a gambler, and a drunk.
Nice.
And Beatrice Ives was a lifelong musician, concert pianist, activist, and reportedly a sharpshooter as well.
Damn.
The family moved to Chicago when Orson was 3 years old, and his mother, who was sure that her young son was a child prodigy, exposed him to the finest music, art, and theater that the city had to offer. In a lot of ways, Orson Welles was a child prodigy, even if much of his childhood achievements have been exaggerated, something that he himself admits freely with much amusement, and usually not even exaggerated by him, but exaggerated by people who were interviewed about him. Orson Welles was almost like an urban legend.
It's good to have a good PR team.
Yeah, and everyone would later want to say that they knew him and that they had known him before he was famous, and they would tell these exaggerated and huge stories about him, even though he was already an exaggerated and huge figure to begin with.
There once was an Orson from Nantucket, and his... Okay, sorry.
So from a very young age, and I mean a very young age, like 4 or 5 years old, Orson Welles played the violin and the piano beautifully.
Damn.
Encouraged and sometimes pushed by his mother, who doted on him and treated him like a little adult at the same time. Sadly, though, when Orson was just 9 years old,
he murdered his mom.
His mother died from hepatitis.
Oh, dear.
And he was left with a distracted father who was often at the bottom of a bottle. Now, it was when his mother died that Orson put down his musical instruments and picked up paintbrushes.
Okay. What?
My mother, who was a professional musician, died when I was 9, and I stopped playing immediately. It's a kind of traumatic shock from her death, combined with, I think, essential laziness, the delight of not having to go on doing those scales, and abandoned my career in music. That's what I was supposed to be destined for. I was spoiled in a very strange way as a child, because everybody told me from the moment I was able to hear that I was absolutely marvelous. I never heard a discouraging word for years, you see. I didn't know what was ahead of me. I painted it, they said, nobody's ever seen such painting, you know. I played, nobody's ever played like that. And it just seemed to me no limit to what I could do.
At the age of 11, Orson began attending the Todd School for Boys in Woodstock, Illinois, where he dazzled the headmaster and his teachers with his natural artistic and theatrical abilities. And within no time, he was put in charge of the school plays. Not only did Orson act in the plays, but he also directed the other students. He wrote scripts, he designed costumes, and he created sets.
He's a psycho.
A fellow student of Wells,
I like him.
He said, quote, "The theater was totally Orson's. It was a one-man band," end quote.
You know, there was 2 or 3 other kids that were super talented that are like, fuck that motherfucking fuckface fucker.
At the age of 16, Orson left school and the United States to travel to Ireland and paint.
To paint? What are you talking?
And for an entire summer, he traveled around on a cart pulled by a donkey.
Nice.
Painting during the day and sleeping under the cart at night. But when the weather became cooler, Orson headed to Dublin, where he found himself at the Gate Theatre watching a play. Now, Orson Welles was never a shy person. That when he wasn't when he was a kid or a teenager or a grown man. And he ended up talking his way backstage. And once there, he convinced the Gates co-founder, Hilton Edwards, that he was 19 years old instead of 16 years old, and that he was already an established and famous stage actor in New York City.
Boom.
Now,
Boom.
None of this was true. He was 16 years old, and he'd never been on a professional stage in his life. But He was also a good actor and was able to convince a professional adult man that he was basically a famous Broadway actor.
Boom. Can I say a real quick story? Show business is full of shit.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that.
Right.
But even if you're an artist, like, lie. Just lie. There was a band at one point that were like, okay, we're going to Germany, guys. Everybody, this is our last show in our town. We're going to go to Germany for 3 weeks. And then they fucking did it. They had their goodbye show. People gave them extra money, bought more shirts and CDs than they normally would. Then they went into their apartment and they're like, we didn't book any shows in Germany. And they just pretended. And no one gives a fuck.
No way.
It's entertainment business.
Oh my God.
So just lie. Sorry.
Now, even at 16, Orson was tall, standing at over 6'2", but he had a baby face that always made him appear younger than he actually was. So he had to do a lot of acting to convince everyone that he was an adult.
That's why I smoke a cigar. I got cigars and smoked them that day in order to look older, and kept the cigar in order to seem like an older actor. In fact, I played most of the old parts in Dublin.
Yes, and then in America too, when you went back to America the year after.
Yes, because there were no parts for anybody with such a baby face.
And he was good on stage. He was so good. He had a presence that no one could ever put into words, although many have tried. Orson Welles was a kind of actor who, within moments of watching him, you would believe he was actually the character he was playing. He had this almost innate ability to pull you with him out of reality and into the story.
Nice.
You weren't just watching, you were in it with him. So within no time, Welles did make it to New York City, and he joined an American theater company.
By lying. Lie, people.
One reviewer wrote of him, quote, "Although he is physically graceless off stage, pudgy and unathletic, his size and booming voice gave him an authoritative stage presence." End quote. Yikes.
Dick.
So I cringe at the
New
way
York,
some of
bro.
these. I know some of
God.
these critics speak about these public figures.
That was
It's
probably
just
his
terrible.
friend, too. That's how New York
Right.
is. They probably shared a flat together.
Yikes. But it was his booming voice and his ability to express a million subtle emotions through that voice that brought Orson his most lucrative career opportunity, which was radio.
Boom.
At first, he freelanced for several networks, and for years, audiences listened to multiple characters, sometimes multiple characters in the same show.
I like it.
Not knowing that each one, although different and unique, were voiced by the same man.
Oh, nice.
So at this point, our listening audience might see a parallel here, right?
What are you doing, wife? Are you comparing me to Orson Welles,
Maybe.
for fuck's sake? Good God.
Maybe. His most...
I'll get off the island right now. I'll go swim. I don't belong on the island with the rest of y'all.
His most famous role was that of the Shadow, the dramatic crime-fighting hero of the radio world.
Boom.
The weed of crime bears bitter fruit. Crime does not pay. The shadow knows.
Next week, same time, same station.
Hey, what do people taste like, eh? Dr. Smokey knows.
In 1935, a 19-year-old Orson Welles teamed up with producer John Houseman, who was 10 years his senior.
I think I just put G.I. Joes away around 19, I think. That's when I was like, girls are great. No, maybe it was a little earlier. Okay, anyway, go.
Together, they worked on a play with Welles as the lead, and by 1936, they were creating and performing plays together for the Federal Theater Project, which was a government program that employed nearly 15,000 actors, directors, writers, designers, and stage techs who would present plays for affordable prices to a Depression-era audience. But Welles and Houseman were known for pulling no punches and being equal opportunity critics. So when a few of their plays were politically driven and encouraged things like unions, they were promptly fired.
Oh.
Now, Welles and Houseman would go on to begin their own theater company,
Which they called the Fuck You Union because they're dicks.
after getting fired from the government, and they named it the Mercury Theater.
Union.
Within no time, the Mercury Theater, Orson Welles, and the actors were renowned, and this landed Orson Welles on the cover of Time magazine in May of 1938. But he was wearing full stage makeup and a costume, so he looked like, like an old guy. So the world knew the name Orson Welles, but they didn't really know what he looked like. But this publicity for Orson Welles and his theater company prompted the CBS radio network to offer Welles his own weekly radio program where he would present 1-hour dramas based on familiar novels and stories.
Nice.
Welles brought in his partner in the theater, John Houseman, to produce and to write, as well as many actors from the Mercury Theater to perform in different voice roles.
Fun.
On July 11th, 1938, the Mercury Theater performed its adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yes.
And in the following weeks, they would perform other classics such as Jane Eyre,
Top Gun,
Treasure Island, Julius Caesar,
Batman Forever,
and A Tale of Two Cities. With Houseman writing the scripts and producing each week, the music for the program was compiled and sometimes even composed by Bernard Herrmann of CBS, who conducted a 27-piece orchestra during each live broadcast each week.
God damn, that'd be some
That's
high-pressure voice acting.
crazy, right?
Maybe get your lines right. You're like, oh, fuck, they got the oboes off. Now we got to do the oboe, too, over fuck.
Well, and of course, there were also sound effects. And without the technology we have today and with a limited budget.
Yeah, they were shooting actual guns.
Right.
They're like, all right, arm the guy with the gun, the sound.
Radio producers had to get creative with sound to add texture to radio shows. So an example of this, a large thin sheet of copper would be suspended on wires in the studio.
Thunder.
And whenever it was moved, it would sound exactly like thunder.
All our sound here at SKATCAST is 100% real. All our skit scats are done on location. I'm actually soaking wet right now and cold and kind of scared. And I'm almost certain there's crickets out here, and I know there's coyotes. It's fucking cold, man. What the fuck, November? So anyway, yeah, we shoot our scenes outside nature like nature intended. It's a highly oiled machine. Wait, what happened to the rain? Oh, there we go. Oh, fuck.
Sorry.
And according to author Galgiaro, the Mercury Theater cut a cabbage in half with a cleaver to mimic the sound of the guillotine for the performance of The Count of Monte Cristo.
What?
And they would flush toilets to make it sound like oars were going through the water. I mean, I think that's pretty creative stuff.
Here's my horse sound that I do a lot of the time.
Oh, wow. Yes.
See?
I didn't know that.
I'm riding dick. I'm riding myself. Riding that dick. But yeah, and it's just a little box that I have that came with crystals.
Well, I know you end up raiding the kitchen and, coins and jars and...
I've got so many things
You've got
here
all kinds of little
that make
sounds.
fun noises. Yeah, texture in audio is everything.
That's
really
awesome.
Is.
I'm telling you, there is a comparison. There's a parallel here.
I'm not comparing myself to fucking. No,
I'm doing
Orson
it.
Welles. No,
I'm doing it.
Well, I appreciate the kindness, but I doubt poop jokes. Poop jokes.
Your Orson would be like, well, no, I think he'd probably enjoy what you're doing with a big giant fat cigar sticking out of his face.
He's a bit more cerebral than what I do.
Well, yeah, but he had a great sense of humor. So by August of 1938, CBS was advertising Welles' radio show as the brightest sensation of the drama season. And when October rolled around, Welles knew what he wanted to do something spooky for the last week of the month. So he chose a science fiction novel called War of the Worlds to create for the show that would air the night before Halloween. However, Orson didn't just want to tell the story. Of course not. That would be dull. He wanted to pull the audience into it with him. He would later say, quote, I had conceived the idea of doing a radio broadcast in such a manner that a crisis would actually seem to be happening and would broadcast in such a dramatized form as to appear to be a real event taking place at that time rather than a mere play. End quote.
Nice. He did Cloverfield before that was even a twinkle in a person's eye.
But of course, there's still a difference between making it seem like a real event and doing the most to convince people that it actually is a real event. And that's an important difference here. Instead of just telling the story of the War of the Worlds, the Mercury Theater would present it to the country in the form of what appeared to be news broadcasts, interrupting regular programming.
Clever cunts.
Something that America was already familiar with. In 1932, the kidnapping of the Lindbergh baby was announced with a special bulletin during regularly scheduled programming, as was the May 1937 explosion of the Hindenburg and Hitler's occupation of Austria in March of 1938. So,
damn, imagine that time period,
right?
where you're like, little orphan Annie, check out your decoder ring. This just in, shit is going to be remembered. This will be remembered forever.
So basically, Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater Company wanted to present War of the Worlds to America in the form of breaking news, as if it was actually happening. But there was an introduction at the beginning of the hour when the radio program started to let people know.
This is not real.
Yeah, exactly. They were actually listening to a dramatized production.
Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
But then Orson Welles himself goes into a very spooky and bone-chilling monologue inspired by the actual introduction in the War of the Worlds novel.
Ladies and gentlemen, the director of the Mercury Theater and star of these broadcasts, Orson Welles.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own. We know now that as human beings busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space. Yet across an immense ethereal gulf, minds that are to our minds as ours are to the beasts in the jungle, intellects vast, cool, and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. In the 39th year of the 20th century came the Great Disillusionment. It was near the end of October. Business was better. The war scare was over. More men were back at work. Sales were picking up. On this particular evening, October 30th, the Crosley service estimated that 32 million people were listening in on radios.
Then his voice fades out to what seems to be a benign and run-of-the-mill weather report. So if you were listening to the first 3 or 4 minutes of this broadcast, you would know that this was a dramatization. It's a radio show based on, H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. And now we're getting into it. But
people were dealing with their chitrins.
But if you turned on the radio like 5 minutes in, you might not know that. However, Orson Welles changed the original story. He modernized it. The original novel was written by Herbert George Wells, who we all know as H.G. Wells. But before H.G. Wells was a science fiction writer, he was actually a science teacher. And he actually published some biology textbooks, so he was very interested in science, scientific evidence, things like that.
One of my most prized books that I own is an Orson Welles, it's a book about the world. It's like an encyclopedia.
Orson Welles or H.G. Wells?
H.G. Wells, sorry. H.G. Wells, yeah. It's like one of first or second edition of it, too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So today, H.G. Wells is known as the Shakespeare of science fiction. due to the brilliant and enduring novels that he wrote, such as The Time Machine and The Island of Dr. Moreau.
Yep.
In 1897, Wells published The War of the Worlds in serialized form in Pearson's Magazine. Pearson's Magazine was in the UK, and the United States liked it, so they picked it up and they put it in the Cosmopolitan magazine. After this, he actually compiled it all and put it into a novel, which we know now as War of the Worlds.
Boom.
Now, the events in the War of the Worlds were told to us by an unidentified male narrator and his brother. It all started in 1894 when Mars was closer to Earth than it had ever been before, and observatories all around the world began seeing flashes of light coming from the surface of the red planet.
Boom.
Our narrator spots these flashes of light for himself from an observatory in Surrey, England, and he brings it to the attention of his friend, who also happens to be an astronomer. Now, the astronomer tells our narrator that the chances of life on Mars are 1,000,000 to 1. The flashes of light coming from Mars continues for several nights until one morning a bright light, believed to be a falling star or a meteor of some sort, appears in the sky over England, and it makes impact with the Earth near our narrator's home in Mayberry. The narrator obviously goes to the crash site, where he finds a group of people gathered around a large metallic cylinder in a sand pit. Eventually, the cylinder begins to open, and inside is a hideous Martian. Basically, just a large head that the narrator describes as, quote, a big, grayish, rounded bulk, the size perhaps of a bear, was rising slowly and painfully out of the cylinder. As it bulged up and caught the light, it glistened like wet leather. The whole creature heaved and pulsated convulsively.
What the fuck you reckon that is? I think the shitter's full and this is a repercussions of Chipotle.
Hello.
What the fuck is that? It's either an alien invasion or the repercussions of Chipotle.
A lank, tentacular appendage gripped the edge of the cylinder. Another swayed in the air. End quote. It was a real-life Martian, and suddenly there were flashes of light as the Martian began to incinerate everyone and everything around it with its laser beams.
Do you blame it, though, really?
More cylinders began to land on Earth. The Martians and members of the human military began to fight, but the humans were outmatched in forms of technology because the Martians have lasers and heat rays. Oh, and did I forget to mention giant metallic fighting machines?
Quite.
The fighting machines were enormous, towering metal tripods higher than a house, with the ability to move quickly over long distances, destroying everything in its path. The human beings had no chance. Now, the Martians were there to take over our world because their world was dying, and they began to move from the countryside towards London, releasing poisonous black smoke over the entire city and causing a massive evacuation of people fleeing from the path of the invading army of aliens. Now, even if you haven't read this book, the story likely feels familiar to you because of movies that have been made that follow this storyline.
It's
However,
a trope now, yeah.
Yeah, there may be some of you that may have no idea what the story is about, and because of that, I'm going to withhold telling you the twist, because although this book was written over 100 years ago, it really is a great book, and I don't want to spoil it for you in case you want to check it out for yourself.
There's aliens in it. That's the twist. Get
So,
there.
H.G. Wells was extremely creative, but he was also very scientifically minded, and he was intrigued by astronomers who, at the time, were theorizing that there could be life on Mars. William Herschel, the English astronomer who discovered the planet Uranus, he actually proposed that the environment on Mars would be able to support intelligent life. And in 1877, Giovanni Scarpelli, an Italian astronomer, he observed a dense network of linear structures on the surface of Mars, which he called canali. Now, the word canali in Italian means channels, but his term was incorrectly translated by the scientific community in the U.S. to canals. Now, as we know, canals on the planet Earth are dug by humans. They're man-made. So a lot of people, including, surprisingly, some scientists, took this to mean
of course,
that if there were canals on Mars, they had to have been dug by someone, which would likely be people or beings living on Mars.
Proof fucking positive.
Early American astronomer Percival Lowell, who devoted his personal fortune and energy to studying Mars in order to prove that the red planet held life, he built an entire private observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona, and he claimed to have seen the canals on Mars through his own telescope.
No way.
Lowell claimed that Mars was inhabited by a civilization that was far more advanced than Earth's, and he even took it one step further, claiming that the oceans on Mars had dried up, which is obviously why the Martians had built the canals, and maybe the planet Mars was not in such great shape. So,
guy figured it all out. He knew for sure he was right.
This actually prompted H.G. Wells to be like, well, what if Mars is dying and the people living there, or the Martians living there, they need a new planet? And what if they came to Earth?
Boom.
According to a January 1898 interview with H.G. Wells, he claimed that one day he and his brother had been walking and discussing the effect of an artillery bombardment on a village in the South Seas, and Wells had asked his brother, quote, "How would it be with us if some creatures of a vastly superior power came down upon us and behaved like a drunken man-of-war's crew, let loose amongst gentle savages?" End quote. So basically, what would happen if aliens came down to Earth and they weren't friendly?
Fucking killing.
You know, what would happen if they wanted our planet and they didn't really need us to be here in order to inhabit our planet?
That itself is a subtrope.
What would what would that look like? What kind of panic would ensue once humans realized they were no match for these Martians and their advanced technology? Of course, we would flee. We would run. Chaos would ensue. Now, the novel War of the Worlds had been written during a time of peace and prosperity, and it was welcomed by people from all over the world as a fun form of entertainment. A what-if sort of thought experiment. However, when Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater did their own version of the alien invasion story...
Kind of groundbreaking for the radio of the time.
The world and the U.S. were much, much different. Between financial instability at home and insecurity overseas, people were on edge.
Can you imagine? They're like, the war, the famine, the fucking depression. Now we got aliens. Fuck.
People were really scared. Basically, they were scared that at any moment there's going to be another world war, and, well, they were right.
Yeah.
They didn't know they were right at the time, but they were correct in their concerns. They were also worried that at any moment, maybe another natural disaster like a hurricane could hit, or, you know, another stock market crash. They were in such dark places, mentally, financially, emotionally, that one more horrible event was just going to push them over the edge. They were ready to believe that anything was possible because they'd already lived through so much.
Right.
To be fair, the people of 1938 were vastly different than the people of 2022. Today, we have our finger on the pulse of all the information from one corner of the world to the other.
So misinformed still.
Right. Well, we've got social media and news outlets that let us know when things are happening in real time, and we can also see others react and discuss these events as they happen. So we get many different viewpoints.
Mainly bots and 14-year-old boys.
Well, yeah. Well, we have a communal ability to discuss how believable these news stories are, and of course, there were then, just as now, people who will just believe everything they read or everything they hear on the news.
I do.
However, most people, I think, have a healthy dose of skepticism, and we can see others discussing ideas like, I don't know how much I believe this, or I don't know how true that is.
Yeah, that's not on the news.
I'm going to have to wait for more information. And because of that, we're also very skeptical of everything. Because we definitely don't live in a time where we can trust everything we hear or read, and we've been burned so many times by misinformation spread to further one narrative or another. We really don't know what to believe half the time, but we do know we need to see things with our own eyes these days to believe in them. We have to do our own research. We have to figure things out for ourselves. Because Orson Welles and his theater wanted to put on a truly amazing performance, they did certain things to make it seem even more realistic. Instead of the alien invasion taking place in London, as H.G. Wells had written it, Orson brought the aliens to the East Coast, a rural town about 50 miles from New York City called Grover's Mill, New Jersey.
Yes.
Scriptwriter Howard Cook was brought in, and on Orson's instruction, he added eyewitness accounts and interviews. He made the news bulletins seem more real, basing them on news reports he had heard himself during the Hindenburg explosion, which, by that way, also it coincidentally happened in New Jersey.
Ooh.
An actor named Kenny Delmar was hired by Wells because it was sort of well known that Kenny did an impeccable FDR impression. Now, this was tricky because the White House and the radio broadcasting networks had kind of made a deal, kind of an unspoken deal with each other, that the president's voice should not be imitated on the radio.
Damn.
Just to avoid any confusion or issues.
Wrong.
You know, the people of the country had grown used to hearing Roosevelt's voice during his fireside chats, and without being able, without being able to see the person behind the voice, they might just assume that anyone who sounded like him was him.
Damn.
Now, during the broadcast, Kenny Delmar was technically voicing the Secretary of the Interior.
Okay.
But when
sounded like...
right, but when he asked Wells for some acting notes, like, you know, how do you want this to sound, or which way do you want this to go, he claimed that Orson Welles winked at him and said, quote, "Oh, Kenny, you know what I want," end quote.
FDR, this shit.
So understand, if you were a normal average person listening to the radio that night, and maybe you didn't tune in until a few minutes past the hour, you would have missed the initial introduction announcing that it was a production of War of the Worlds put on by Orson Welles. You would have tuned in, and you would have heard music playing like usual. And then you would have heard a special news bulletin breaking into the music announcing that a Professor Farrell at a Chicago observatory had just spotted several flashes of light on the surface of Mars. Flashes of light that look like explosions of incandescent gas. Now, you might not think too much of it at that point. You might even be wondering, why was it so important enough to interrupt the lovely music. But then the music would come back and you'd move on. However,
setting the mood.
Another news bulletin would break in, and another, and all of a sudden you're listening to an interview with a well-known astronomer, Professor Richard Pearson, at the Princeton Observatory in New Jersey. Now, Professor Pearson was voiced by Orson Welles, and he scoffs at the idea that Mars is inhabited.
We are ready now to take you to the Princeton Observatory at Princeton, where Carl Phillips, our commentator, will interview Professor Richard Pearson, famous astronomer. We take you now to Princeton, New Jersey.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Carl Phillips speaking to you from the observatory at Princeton. I'm standing in a large semicircular room, pitch black except for an oblong split in the ceiling. Through this opening, I can see a sprinkling of stars that cast a kind of frosty glow over the intricate mechanism of the huge telescope. The ticking sound you hear is the vibration of the clockwork. Professor Pearson stands directly above me on a small platform, peering through the giant lens. During this period, he is in constant touch with the astronomical centers of the world. Professor, may I begin our questions?
Any time, Mr. Phillips.
Professor, would you please tell our radio audience exactly what you see as you observe the planet Mars through your telescope?
Nothing unusual at the moment, Mr. Phillips. A red disk swimming in a blue sea. Transverse stripes across the disk.
In your opinion, what do these transverse stripes signify, Professor Pearson?
Not canals, I can assure you, Mr. Phillips. Although that's the popular conjecture of those who imagine Mars to be inhabited. From a scientific viewpoint, the stripes are merely the result of atmospheric conditions peculiar to the planet.
Then you're quite convinced, as a scientist, that living intelligence as we know it does not exist on Mars?
I should say the chances against it are 1,000 to 1.
So with Professor Pearson's scientific explanation, the listener would be lulled into a false sense of security. The professor didn't seem to think anything is wrong. After all, he's smart. He's a professor. However, then Professor Pearson receives a telegram from the National History Museum in New York.
Uh-oh.
Professor Pearson has passed me a message which he has just received. Professor, may I read the message to the listening audience?
Certainly, Mr. Phillips.
Ladies and gentlemen, I shall read you a wire addressed to Professor Pearson from Dr. Gray of the Natural History Museum, New York. Quote, 9:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Seismograph registered shock of almost earthquake intensity occurring within a radius of 20 miles of Princeton. Please investigate. Signed, Lloyd Gray, Chief of Astronomical Division. Unquote. Professor Pearson, could this occurrence possibly have something to do with the disturbances observed on the planet Mars?
Hardly, Mr. Phillips. This is probably a meteorite of unusual size, and its arrival at this particular time is merely a coincidence.
Now, something you also may not have picked up on as a listener in 1938, chilling and all cozy in your favorite armchair, is that the message Professor Pearson received reported an explosion about 20 miles from Princeton, New Jersey at around 9:15 Eastern Time. At that time, if you're listening from the East Coast, it was only about 10 minutes after 8 p.m. So if you were, actually listening for comprehension, you'd be like,
Hey.
oh, this must be fake because it's only like 8:10 p.m. here.
Right.
And they say
it's close, though. It's close.
And they say that this telegram came in at like 9:15. So this can't be true. Or maybe you would just think that they misspoke, that it was a mistake, and you would continue listening as if you thought it was actually happening. And these were actual news broadcasts.
Another leap.
The music would continue. Maybe you're getting a little anxious now, wondering, what's going on? Why do these news broadcasts keep breaking in? I'm on edge right now, which was kind of the point. Those were the technical and dramatic effects that were used in order to keep people a little bit anxious, biting their nails, maybe on the edge of their seat, as any good storyteller or actor would do. Professor Pearson says that the explosion in New Jersey was not connected to the explosions being seen on Mars. But it does seem like an uncanny coincidence, right?
Dun, dun, dun.
I mean, you might move to the edge of your seat as the soothing music of the orchestra picks back up. You're almost expecting another news bulletin at this point, and it comes in the form of a special bulletin from McGill University in Canada, where a professor has just witnessed 3 separate explosions on Mars. And then another news bulletin out of Trenton, New Jersey hits.
Now, nearer home, comes a special bulletin from Trenton, New Jersey. It is reported that at 8:50 p.m., a huge flaming object, believed to be a meteorite, fell on a farm in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey, 22 miles from Trenton. The flash in the sky was visible within a radius of several hundred miles, and the noise of the impact was heard as far north as Elizabeth. We have dispatched a special mobile unit to the scene, and we'll have our commentator, Carl Phillips, give you a word picture of the scene as soon as he can reach there from Princeton.
Luckily, Carl Phillips was able to get from Princeton, New Jersey to Grover's Mill within minutes, and he brought Professor Pearson with him, and they were able to describe this object they see that has crashed into the Earth, which turns out wasn't a meteor at all, but instead a large metallic cylinder.
Tripod.
You can hear a crowd gathering in the background, and they're chattering. Now, these are sound effects done in the studio, but if you were listening on the radio, you'd think, well, these people are really outside staring at a metal cylinder, and there's a whole group of people gathering, also staring at this metal cylinder.
What I can see of the object itself doesn't look very much like a meteor, at least not the meteors I've seen. It looks more like a huge cylinder. Has a diameter of, what would you say, Professor Pearson?
What's that?
What would you say, what's the diameter of this?
About 30 yards.
About 30 yards. The metal on the sheath is, well, I've never seen anything like it. The color is sort of yellowish white. It's curious. Spectators now are pressing close to the object in spite of the efforts of the police to keep them back. They're getting in front of my line of vision. Would you mind standing one side, please, while the police are pushing the crowd back?
And then, while they're live on the radio, the cylinder begins to open and absolute chaos ensues.
Now, we're not more than 25 feet away. Can you hear it now? Professor Pearson?
Yes, Mr. Brooks.
Can you tell us the meaning of that scraping noise inside the thing?
Possibly the unequal cooling of its surface.
I say, do you still think it's a meteor, Professor?
I don't know what to think. The metal casing is definitely extraterrestrial. Not found on this Earth. Friction with the Earth's atmosphere usually tears holes in a meteorite. This thing is smooth, and you can see it's cylindrical
just a
shape.
minute. Something's happening. Ladies and gentlemen, this is terrific. This end of the thing is beginning to flake off. The top is beginning to rotate like a screw, and the thing must be hollow.
He's moving! Keep back there! Keep back there! Keep those men back! Keep back there! Keep those idiots back! Keep off! The top's loose! Look out there! Stand back!
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. Wait a minute. Someone's crawling someone or something. I can see turning out of that black hole two luminous discs. The eyes, it might be a face, might be almost good heavens, something wriggling out of the shadow like a gray snake. Now it's another one and another one and another one. They look like tentacles to me. Oh, yeah, I can see the thing's body. Now it's large as a bear. It glistens like wet leather, but that's fate.
And then the fire comes, followed by destruction and death.
Wait a minute, something's happening. Humped shape is rising out of the pit. I can make out a small beam of light against a mirror. What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror, and it leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on. Oh, Lord, they're turning into flames. Now the whole field's caught up by the woods, the barns, the gas tanks of the automobiles, spreading everywhere. It's coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
They did this part on purpose. Wait for it.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill.
Listening at home, you would have by now thrown yourself out of your seat. Your jaw would be dropped. Your hand would be covering your open mouth. You don't know whether to wait for more news or panic.
Yeah, remember, compare it to, the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah.
Just how silly,
Right.
a sliver of America was like, holy fuck, but it was a sliver of a lot of us. And this was more than that by a lot.
But the next urgent breaking news report lets you know that, well, maybe it's time to panic.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been handed a message that came in from Grover's Mill by telephone. Just one moment, please. At least 40 people, including 6 state troopers, lie dead in a field east of the village of Grover's Mill. Their bodies burned and distorted beyond all possible recognition. The next voice you hear will be that of Brigadier General Montgomery Smith, commander of the state militia at Trenton, New Jersey.
I have been requested by the governor of New Jersey to place the counties of Mercer and Middlesex as far west as Princeton and east to Jamesburg under martial law.
You have just been listening to General Montgomery Smith, commanding the state militia at Trenton. In the meantime, further details of the catastrophe at Grover's Mill are coming in. The strange creatures, after unleashing their deadly assault, crawled back in their pit and made no attempt to prevent the efforts of the firemen to recover the bodies and extinguish the fire. The combined fire departments of Mercer County are fighting the flames which menace the entire countryside. Professor Pearson has been located at a farmhouse near Grover's Mill, where he has established an emergency observation post. As a scientist, he will give you his explanation of the calamity. The next voice you hear will be that of Professor Pearson, brought to you by direct wire. Professor Pearson.
Of the creatures in the rocket cylinder at Grover's Mill, I can give you no authoritative information, either as to their nature, their origin, or their purposes here on Earth. Of their destructive instrument, I might venture some conjectural explanation. For want of a better term, I shall refer to the mysterious weapon as a heat ray. It's all too evident that these creatures have scientific knowledge far in advance of our own.
Luckily, Professor Pearson, also known as Orson Welles, was able to find shelter in a nearby farmhouse. But our dependable news reporter, Carl Phillips, is found among the charred dead bodies.
Oh.
Many people in areas of the East Coast would have begun looking out their windows at this point, searching the skies for lights and searching the ground for beams from Martian heat waves. They didn't see anything, but the news reports were still flooding in.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have a grave announcement to make. Incredible as it may seem, both the observations of science and the evidence of our eyes lead to the inescapable assumption that those strange beings who landed in the Jersey farmlands tonight are the vanguard of an invading army from the planet Mars. The battle which took place tonight at Grover Mills has ended in one of the most startling defeats ever suffered by an army in modern times. 7,000 men armed with rifles and machine guns pitted against a single fighting machine of the invaders from Mars. 120 known survivors. The rest strewn over the battle area from Grover's Mill to Plainsboro, crushed and trampled to death under the metal feet of the monster, or burned to cinders by its heat ray. The monster is now in control of the middle section of New Jersey and has effectively cut the state through its center. Communication lines are down from Pennsylvania to the Atlantic Ocean.
And then the somber voice of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt crackled through the speakers.
This time we take you to Washington for a special broadcast on the national emergency. The Secretary of the Interior.
Citizens of the nation, I shall not try to conceal the gravity of the situation that confronts the country, nor the concern of your government in protecting the lives and property of its people. However, I wish to impress upon you, private citizens and public officials, all of you, the urgent need of calm and resourceful action. Fortunately, this formidable enemy is still confined to a comparatively small area, and we may place our faith in the military forces to keep them there. In the meantime, placing our faith in God, we must continue the performance of our duties, each and every one of us.
So I don't really know what happened here. I guess people just heard Washington and they didn't hear that it was the Secretary of the Interior speaking. And combined with the spot-on FDR imitation done by Kenny Delmar, people thought that the president was actually addressing them about an alien invasion. And it was at this point that the president of CBS, William Paley, got a call at home telling him that people all over the country were panicking. They thought the broadcast was real. They thought that Martians in metal fighting machines with heat rays were taking out entire armies.
If we're going to go out, you know?
Well, they thought they were going forward, leaving the countryside and heading into New York City. Reportedly, this news reached Orson Welles in the studio as he was doing the broadcast.
And he chuckled his ass off.
And they were like, you got to stop. You know, people are freaking out. And people are jumping out of their windows. People are fleeing their homes. People are running over each other trying to escape the East Coast. Our phones are blocked.
They're swimming across the ocean. We're coming to England. We're going to you.
The police are overwhelmed with, emergency calls. You got to stop. And reportedly, Orson Welles was like,
no.
Listen, I'll give you a quick reminder that this is a dramatic broadcast, but I am not stopping. The show must go on.
Attaboy.
Now, according to the newspapers of the day, the broadcast caused a massive panic all over the country. On October 31st, the Journal-Times said, quote, thousands of persons in every part of the country believed last night that the eastern United States had been invaded by creatures from the planet Mars. But it was not limited to the east. In Indianapolis, an unidentified woman ran down the main aisle of St. Paul's Episcopal Church crying, "The world is coming to an end!"
Yay.
The congregation was hastily dismissed. In Toledo, 3 persons fainted at telephones while trying to call the police. In Chicago, people reported that several persons ran out of a restaurant without finishing their meals.
They were just getting away with not paying.
In Salt Lake City, residents packed their belongings and were only dissuaded from fleeing their homes by proof that it was all just entertainment. But In the East, in the country being subjected to the invasion hysteria, ran riot. Several persons came forward to swear they saw the rocket land, and strange creatures climbed out of it. In Newark, New Jersey, hundreds fled from 2 city blocks carrying what possessions they could snatch up in their flight.
Can you imagine the leader of that bunch? He's like, I'm serious. I heard it myself. Let's go.
So just so we know, this is an actual quote from the newspaper. All of this is. Police cars screamed through the streets of a score of towns responding to frenzied alarms. New York police reported that they had handled thousands of calls even while the program was on the air. Newark, New Jersey, Trenton, Philadelphia, and other cities within close range of the focal point of the invasion were equally swamped. End quote. Yeah. That was what the newspapers were printing the day after this happened. And then within the following days and weeks, everything just got so much more dramatic. Now, all of a sudden, it wasn't thousands of people who panicked. It was millions of people. Christ. And people jumping from, top floors of high-rise buildings and all sorts of just insane stories.
Better this than be a slave to the aliens.
And Orson Welles, when he finished the broadcast on October 30th that evening, he had to rush off immediately from the studio to his theater because he had a rehearsal for a play that the Mercury Theater was putting on. He was told, you're basically a murderer. You guys murdered a bunch of people. You made people believe that this was real, and now everything that happens is all your fault. It's a result of the broadcast, and he was like, I don't believe this. This can't possibly be true. But he just went on to his rehearsal.
Right.
He worked all night. And then the next morning, he was interviewed, and reporters were talking to him, and they were asking him questions.
Do you feel bad that you killed hundreds of people?
And he was truly surprised.
Did you ask Shakespeare?
He was truly surprised. He had not expected this. He wanted people to believe it, but he wanted people to believe in it the way you would believe a scary movie.
Right.
Like when you're in the theater. But apparently, to put it plainly, people were truly scared. They were terrified. But then they were pissed. They were really angry. Because,
you made me look like a dick.
Right. Because I think, in my opinion, they were embarrassed that they'd been so scared.
I am a dick, and now people know.
Right.
I'm also stupid.
Once they found out that it wasn't real, they were like, oh, I feel stupid.
I said some shit I can't take back.
But to be fair, the panic and the chaos that the newspapers were reporting on in the wake of the broadcast was greatly over-exaggerated. Right. Surprise!
Yeah, of course.
A fact that even some people today don't seem to realize. Even some major companies like PBS did a special on it, and they were saying everyone. Millions of people listened, and thousands of people were terrified. And all these crazy things were happening. It seems like one of those enduring myths that has continued on for so long.
Right.
Where it's become part of American culture.
Right.
Yes.
It makes people... who like big government stuff.
Right.
They're like, yeah, see how stupid you are?
Right.
You need us.
In reality, many people were scared. Some people even left their homes and started driving away from the New York area. Some people jumped on trains to get away, but as soon as they were on the train, they were like, why isn't everybody else panicking?
No one gives a fuck.
I thought the news broadcast said that the communications were down and the trains weren't running anymore.
Can you imagine talking to people on the train? Be like, you escaping aliens too? They're
right,
like, what
right.
the fuck?
But I was able to buy this plane ticket pretty easy, and now I'm on this train, and people are just like reading the paper and chilling, and nobody seems to be freaking out. And at that point, they put 2 and 2 together, and they were like, well, this is awkward.
That was a waste of money.
Many people in other areas of the country called their relatives on the East Coast to, see if everything was okay or to say their goodbyes. And then they were told, no, everything's fine. There are no Martians banging around in metal war machines. It's just a radio program.
Promise.
Evidently, many people called the switchboard freaking the fuck out. And then the switchboard operators called the studio and they were like, what is happening? I mean, what is really going on? Do you have any more news about this? And the studio was like, Oh, you guys thought that was real? No, it's just a broadcast. Like, it's fake, dramatized broadcast based on The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
Well, people hadn't been media trained like they are now.
Right. Well, then the switchboard operators would get back with the people and tell them, don't worry, it's just fake. And then those switchboard operators would know going forward when anybody called in, they'd just be like, don't worry, it's a fake broadcast. However,
fake news.
There was one switchboard operator. There's always that one, right?
Mm-hmm.
She did not call the studio, just believed that it was real, and then she made it her life's mission to start calling everyone in the town and letting them know about the Martian invasion, and then they needed to go in case they hadn't been listening to the radio. It's so fucking hilarious.
They would take her Twitter account away immediately.
She's like, get out while you can. Yeah. So once again, we might sit here in 2022 and say, yeah, fucking idiots.
Right.
Why would you seriously think that aliens are invading New Jersey and then wading across the Hudson River to wreak havoc on New York City?
Seriously, why New Jersey? I guess the staging ground.
But to be fair, again, the idea that Martians could invade the Earth was not so far-fetched in 1938 as it is in 2022, when we now have scientific proof that there is no life on Mars. So in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Mars was a big deal, as we've already discussed. They just didn't know enough about it, so it was very mysterious, like anything was possible. It's kind of cool to think that there was a time when so much was left unknown, where anything was actually possible, but astronomers were doing their best to prove that there was an intelligent civilization there, digging canals and waiting for their chance to make our planet their own.
It's so much cooler if it, well,
right.
Not the last part, but
Well, in 1901, Nikola Tesla claimed that he was receiving radio communications from Mars. And in 1920,
that helped his credibility a lot, by the way.
Guglielmo Marconi, the inventor of the wireless telegraph, claimed to have personally received signals from outer space saying, quote, "If there are any human beings on Mars, I would not be surprised if they should find a means of communication with this planet," end quote. After Marconi said that, many other legitimate scientists from around the world, from London to Sydney, backed up his claims. And they were like, yeah, we're definitely also receiving messages from another planet.
Yep.
And in 1928, Dr. William Pickering from Harvard University reported seeing the canals on Mars, claiming, quote, "We can only explain them as a result of intelligent beings," end quote. And the New York Times wrote a story about Pickering's findings in 1935 saying, quote, "That there may be life on Mars is no longer denied by advanced astronomers," end quote.
For those canals, I've seen pictures of those.
Right.
They would have to be, they're huge. They're like a bunch of Grand Canyons that
well,
people carved.
They didn't know that. So,
well, fucking dang it.
In all fairness, I do understand how a handful of people here and there would have been upset. But also, in all fairness, although Orson Welles and his theater troupe were certainly very extra with the dramatics and pumping up the realness factor, well done. There were several measures taken to directly and indirectly communicate that this was a broadcast, a fictional broadcast for entertainment and not an actual news broadcast. Although they used real cities, they didn't use real places in those cities. They didn't use the names of real experts and things like that. But once again, the population in 1938 wasn't as up to date on who all the experts were and stuff like that because they didn't have the internet. Also, remember...
People don't even know who their congressman is if they have the internet. So, I mean, come on. It's fine.
Remember, at several intervals throughout the hour broadcast, the time was read out, and it was never the actual time that it was on the East Coast. And also remember when journalist Carl Phillips was interviewing Professor Pearson at the Princeton Observatory, he thanked him for the 10-minute interview. Well, that interview, in reality, you heard it. It only was like, 2 minutes?
Yeah.
And then Phillips and Pearson, they leave the observatory in Princeton to go to Grover's Mill, which was like 11 miles away from the Princeton Observatory, which was a real place. And they were there in like 2 minutes.
Right.
They're in Grover's Mill in just like a few minutes. That just doesn't make sense.
Radio.
But you know, when you're stressed out and when you think Martians are invading,
it's just blur. It's a blur.
Well, maybe you're
flashes.
not paying too much attention to timelines and things like that. And like when Professor Pearson gets the telegram from the National History Museum, the message says that there's an explosion at 9:15 p.m. Eastern, but it was only 10 minutes after 8 in actual time. There was also an announcement made at the beginning of the hour to tell the audience they were listening to War of the Worlds with Orson Welles. This same announcement was made, I think, roughly halfway through the hour and again at 40 minutes past the hour. And I believe that's when Orson Welles was probably told to stop, and he was like, no.
We've done it already.
I'll let people know this is fake, but I'm going to keep going. And then again at the end of the hour.
Let them die for my art.
It was like, thank you. You've been listening to War of the Worlds with Orson Welles. You know, the normal intro, outro, and then a couple reminders during the hour. Well, here's some data. According to Radiolab.com, about 12 million people were listening to the broadcast when it was on air. And about 1 in 12 people thought that the broadcast was real.
Nice.
And a percentage of those 1 million people ran out of their homes and panicked. However, according to Slate.com, quote, far fewer people heard the broadcast and fewer still panicked than most believe today.
Right.
How do we know? The night the program aired, the C.E. Hooper rating service telephoned 5,000 households for its national rating survey. And they asked, to what programs are you listening? The respondents asked. Only 2% answered a radio play or the Orson Welles program or something similar, indicating CBS. None said a news broadcast, according to a summary published in Broadcasting. In other words, 98% of those surveyed were listening to something else or nothing at all on October 30th, 1938.
Okay.
The minuscule rating is not surprising. Welles' program was scheduled against one of the most popular national programs at that time, ventriloquist Edgar Bergen's Chase and Sanborn Hour, a comedy variety show.
How do you do a ventriloquist act?
I don't know.
Radio?
I know.
Hey, I'm not moving my mouth, I promise. Now, this is Timmy. I'm Timmy. See, my mouth isn't moving, I promise. No, Timmy.
So that was the quote from Slate. Slate, among many other, believes that the newspapers of the day seized on the opportunity of a small amount of believers who had been listening to Welles' show, and they used it to blow it totally out of proportion and discredit radio as a source of credible news. It was the golden age of radio, after all, and many...
Wait. This was the communists? What the fuck, man? God damn it.
It was a golden age of radio, and after all, many print publications had been losing their advertisers and readership to radio. It's very similar to the way the mainstream news outlets talk down about YouTube and alternate media sources today, and they try to make it seem like YouTubers are out there spreading dangerous misinformation.
Dangerous.
The old is always going to have a problem with the new.
Yeah.
Now, the old could just get on board with the new, but instead they choose to complain about how nobody watches us anymore. And to be honest, if the newspapers did this purposely to try and make radio look bad, I can understand why people didn't trust them anymore. Now, as the days and the weeks went on, the number of people who called into the police increased in the papers.
I'm suing.
And they were printing that people had jumped from their windows or attempted to poison their own children.
Whoa, okay.
So the
First one, good, fine. Second one, no, bad.
So the Martians didn't get their hands on the kids.
Oh.
And they really focused on this one actress from New York City who had been rushed to the hospital after she ran out of her apartment during the broadcast and had broken her arm falling down the stairs. Now,
what?
So I believe that this woman was the only person hurt as a result of the broadcast. And I truly believe that. Otherwise, logically, I don't think she would have been on the cover of every fucking newspaper with a sling on her arm and her sad story just, continuing to be put in the paper day after day, paper after paper. If the papers could have found a bigger tragedy to showcase, like a person who actually jumped out a window to their death on that night.
A picture of goo on the pavement.
Right.
Like, that guy's goo now because of this show.
Or a person who had actually poison their children so the Martians wouldn't get them, they would have put those stories in there.
Yeah.
They would have pushed those stories. So,
Fake
however,
news.
one paper did give their own opinion in support of the broadcast, and I think it's a good one. I think it's an opinion based in logic that can even be applied today in the year 2022 or in any year for that matter.
Are we going to learn something now?
The New York
All
World
right, I'm ready to
Telegram
learn.
said, quote, "We don't agree with those who are arguing that the Sunday night scare shows a need for strict government censorship of radio programs.
Agreed.
On the contrary, we think it is evidence of how dangerous political control of radio might become. If so many people could be misled unintentionally when the purpose was merely to entertain, what could designing politicians not do through control of broadcasting stations?"
Hi.
End
Welcome to
quote.
the screens. Welcome to the world of propaganda in your
I'm-
face when you wake up.
Right. I mean, history has shown us that other governments around the world have done this to their own people.
Yeah.
Use the media, radio, television, newspaper as propaganda.
It's too tempting for government people to not use those
As
things.
another
It's too
arm of the government, so it's not hard to believe. Basically, the point is, no, we don't need government censorship. We just need to be smarter ourselves, right?
Hope so.
We don't need government censorship because they can choose what we hear.
Well, the reason why people didn't panic and stuff, like you said, when they're on the train and shit, while they're like, "Hey, you guys didn't hear about the thing on the train?" And they're like, "Dude, that's not what's going on." There was a whole bunch of people that were like, "Whoa, you're weird."
No, of course nobody wants to be scared by an alien invasion, but we also have the opportunity to utilize critical thinking. To look outside our window and make sure there's no Martians out there. To,
Let me take a
ask
second
around or
look.
call in and find out for ourselves that it wasn't as real as many people did. However, then when they found out it wasn't real, they felt stupid.
Right, that's the problem.
Yep.
People's brains.
They got mad and they wanted heads to roll. So basically, don't believe everything you hear from any source, even us, even the Dipshit files.
No, definitely listen to us all the way through for every word.
Take responsibility for what shapes your opinions and beliefs. And do your own research, fact check, validate, learn for yourself.
Learn how to do research too, because there's fucking around on the internet with your thumbs, and then there's kind of
Well, that's
research
what
can be very difficult.
That's what the people of Grover's Mill, New Jersey did. And of course, not fact check on the internet. The village where the alien invasion started.
See, that's where they went astray. They should have fact checked. The
When they heard on the radio that Martians were landing in their own backyard, they looked outside and they were like,
Nope.
"No, they're not.
Don't look like an alien.
No
to me.
Martians here. Let's go back to dinner." They realized it was just an entertainment broadcast. Paula Getty, head archivist of the Historical Society of West Windsor, said, quote, "At the time, this was almost all farmland. There were very few trees.
So they could just look out. They're like, "No, I don't see them."
The view would have been more than a mile.
Yeah,
All anyone had to do that night was look out a window and see that nothing was going on." End quote. Although it does appear that a resident or two of Groves Mill did get nervous, and they allegedly shot the old wooden water tower, believing it was a Martian fighting machine.
That's the story
And-
that people remember the
Right.
most.
Well,
yeah.
there's also the well-known picture of Grover's Mill resident William Duck, and this picture was in Life magazine, and then, of course, it was all over all magazines and newspapers. So it's basically William Duck holding a rifle, and the magazine claimed that he was protecting his home from the Martians during the broadcast, but the picture was taken in broad daylight. This was at nighttime.
Right.
And it's more likely that Mr. Doc was protecting his home and his village from the hordes of reporters and looky-loos that had descended on the sleepy town, because within days, thousands of people were pulling up into Grover's Mill trying to check it out from themselves. The typical stuff, trying to get people to tell them how horrible it was and how scared they were.
Right.
And I don't think the reporters ever got what they wanted from Grover's Mill, so they had to make stuff up. In Grover's Mill, these were like country people. They're like First of all, I ain't got time to listen to the radio.
Right. I got pigs that need fed.
So I didn't know anything was happening. And if I was listening to the radio, I looked outside and there was no Martian, so I went back to my life. What is wrong with you city people? Get the hell out of here.
You guys are bored.
Right?
Get out.
Now, the War of the Worlds broadcast, it did get some backlash, of course. I dug up some angry letters that were sent to Orson Welles and the FCC from pissed off citizens, and I couldn't help but giggle to myself when I was reading them. I mean, I understand why they might have thought this was real for a minute or a little bit, and I understand why they might have felt foolish when they realized it wasn't, but at that point, you just have to laugh at yourself and move on. However,
some of them like organize posses and shit. You know, between commercial breaks, they're like, and then all of a sudden they're like, and we'll be right back with Orson Welles, and they're like, oh shit, that was.
However,
my bad.
This is the reality. People, they're going to be people. So many times when people feel foolish or they're embarrassed, it turns into anger, and then they need to get their pound of flesh.
And that's why Hitler existed.
They need to wag their finger at someone. Someone has to pay for the negative emotion that they were forced to feel against their will. And, well, you know, I think a lot of people who haven't developed a ton of emotional intelligence, or who don't have good coping skills, or who don't have a real handle on their emotions, whenever they feel an emotion they don't want to feel, like sadness, fear, vulnerability, they turn it into anger because it's the only emotion that feels productive to them.
Goddamn.
At that point, the other emotions, they just feel shameful. And I can say this because I was like that for a long time, a very long time, so I completely understand it. But some of these letters had me rolling. About 1,400 of these letters were sent to Welles, and they still exist in the archives, but only 10% of them were negative.
Oh, cool.
So, from MZ from New Jersey writes, quote, "If what I think of you would ever take effect, it would burn you to a cinder, hoping never to hear from you again," end quote.
Thank you.
EB from Indiana writes, quote, "Aren't you ashamed of yourself?"
Yes.
"Well, I'll not tell you what I'm thinking because you would probably have me arrested,"
Ooh.
end quote. Hey, you sound like a good person. MJ from Illinois said, quote, "You have made radio a medium of deception, which, if allowed to continue, could make radio a menace," end quote.
This is what his Twitter would
I know.
look like, and we're just putting a bunch of these.
MM from Oklahoma said, quote, "Perhaps you'd put on your little play 50 years ago, it would have been a joke. But the way science has progressed in that time, surely nothing is impossible," end quote. And
boycott his sponsors. Boycott.
And he signed it scorchingly. So basically, because science has progressed in technology, and there could be something out there, we can never talk about it because it will scare you if you talk about something that could possibly be true. Or
logic.
Make it make sense.
That's logic.
Oh, God.
Eat my logic.
So, and then there's GH in California. Quote, I think the safest place for you is Mars. Take a rocket and get going. Nuts to you.
Man,
end
Frank,
quote.
don't let them know about fucking, you're blowing over the whole project. Fuck off, you fucking idiot. You're telling people about aliens. We don't want them to know.
Orson Welles had a lot of supporters, though, too. To be honest, they mirror my thoughts, and some of these people are able to laugh at themselves, like HLS and AWH from Denver, Colorado, who said, quote, "It's a good thing we have strong hearts. Otherwise, we would have been dead from fright. We hate to admit it, but the acting was simply superb," end quote. Now,
that's how you do it.
Those are my kind of people.
Yeah.
MH from the Bronx, New York said, quote, "Despite the fact that the neighborhood as a whole is instituting a mass movement to string you to a tree, rest assured you have a few faithful backers. Perhaps the nation needs to be embarrassed by its own ignorance once in a while," end quote.
Dear Orson, I shit myself, but I don't blame you. I just praise you for it. Thank you.
R.I. from Ohio said, quote, "All this goes to illustrate the low mentality of the average listener.
Well, now that's just telling on how she feels about the
They do not see 1/10 of what they read. They must not listen to 1/2 of what they hear," end quote.
All right.
And then from EC from Connecticut, they said, quote, Don't people think anymore? My God, what the propagandist of the next war can do.
Ooh,
End quote.
Correct.
And then DOG from Indiana said, quote, it shakes one's faith in democracy to think that such hysteria and panic can affect people who are supposed to vote intelligently next week.
Solution,
End quote.
solution, one-party system dictatorship by that person.
And then one of my favorites, PVW from New Jersey, said, quote, the infernal machines passed within blocks from my house, and I didn't think to step outside to see them. Mm-hmm. After New York was destroyed, we all went to bed. End quote. See, these people have a sense of humor.
Some of them.
They can look at what happened, acknowledge that they were scared, acknowledge the emotion they had, feel it, let it pass, and then laugh about it, instead of turning that feeling into anger and then literally going on a witch hunt.
At least one of those was like an excuse to hate their fellow man. Where they're like, you're all
I know,
stupid. It's like 99% of people were not stupid. Nah, they're all dumb and they don't listen.
A lot of
Fucking
Orson
idiot.
Welles supporters who thoroughly enjoyed the tale of the Martian invasion as a pre-Halloween night treat were children. NC from Chicago, Illinois wrote, quote, I've been chosen as a representative to tell you how sorry we all are that the people didn't like your play. Whatever happens because of your radio play, you will know that a dozen children will stick by you. End quote. Now,
that's probably the most important. He's probably like, I like that letter. That letter means something.
Now, on the morning of October 31st, 1938, Orson Welles became unwittingly infamous and was thrust into the spotlight, but not the spotlight he was used to, that of a Broadway stage. He was thrust into the spotlight of a critical public eye. This was really the first time that Orson Welles would be in front of the world in this way. He was used to being on stage in full costume and makeup, or behind a microphone, his voice being heard by millions, but his face remaining a mystery. Then all these reporters gathered around him, and they're like shouting questions at him, and he kept his cool. He's unshaven, he looks exhausted because it's the day after. Remember, he left the studio, and after the broadcast, he went right to the dress rehearsal for his play. He was there throughout the entire night, and he got zero sleep. He didn't shave his face. I think he's actually wearing the same clothes he wore when he did the broadcast after he changed out of his costume, but he still handles all of these annoying reporters. I would have lost my shit, but they gather around him obnoxiously, and he keeps his cool, and he answers honestly. Not always an answer they probably want to hear, because what they wanted for him to do was apologize and bow down to the court of public opinion. You know, whatever you want, I'm so sorry, I prostrate myself at your feet. But he didn't do that. What he did was be honest. He acknowledged that he hadn't expected it, and he was surprised by it, and he just told the people what he felt.
I simply don't know. I can't imagine. I mean, you must realize that when I left the broadcast last night, I went into dress rehearsal for a play that's opening in 2 days, and I've had almost no sleep, and I know less about this than you do. I haven't read the papers, except...
You were aware of terror at the time you were giving this role? Were you aware that terror was going on throughout the nation?
Oh, no, of course not. We did Dracula, and it seemed to me during Dracula I had high hopes that people would react as they do in a movie of that kind, and I don't know that they did, particularly, and so I've given up. One doesn't believe in the radio audience much. You don't know that whether they're listening or not. You have no idea how many people are listening or what they're thinking. I had every hope that the people would be excited as they would be at a melodrama. But you don't play down the melodramatic effects of a melodrama.
Mr. Wells, why did you use local towns in this world?
Well, H.G. Wells uses local towns addressing an English audience. I was addressing an American audience, so the transplantation was quite logical, it seemed to me. He doesn't use mythical towns. He uses quite real ones.
Ask loud, very loud. Louder! Do you think, Mr. Wells, that you might have taken unfair advantage of the public in using a method as a conveyance for authentic news?
I don't believe that I have, since it is not a method original with me. It is used by many radio programs. I am terribly shocked by the effect it's had. I do not believe that the method is original with me or peculiar to the Mercury Theater's presentation.
Do you think there ought to be a law against such enactments as we had last night as a result of that?
I don't know what the legislation would be. I know that almost everybody in radio would do almost anything to avert the kind of thing that has happened, myself included, but I don't know what the legislation would be. Radio is new and we are learning about the effect it has on people. Well, every radio program tries to be more dramatic than life, as every play tries to be more dramatic than life, and every movie, not less so. I would have been surprised if hurt, as anybody would, if they'd been told that a presentation was less effective than life.
At the end of the day, the dramatic broadcast was the best thing that ever happened to Orson Welles. Mm-hmm. Within a week, the Campbell Soup Company, huge, big time, they offered to sponsor Welles' weekly radio show, and they renamed it with the Campbell name. That was a big sponsor back then.
Sell out.
The world could not deny that a bad actor would never have been able to pull this off.
Right.
Orson Welles was a lot of things, but he was not a bad actor. And by 1939, Orson Welles was in Los Angeles because he literally was courted by all these producers and studio heads. At that point, he began writing, producing, directing, and starring in movies, such as the film he's most known for, Citizen Kane, which hit theaters in 1941.
And is largely considered one of the greatest movies of all time, if not the greatest. So,
by the way, a little tongue-in-cheek trivia, because Orson Welles was a tongue-in-cheek kind of guy. And during the movie, Welles' character, Charles Kane, he announces, quote, "Don't believe everything you hear on the radio," end quote.
That's cool.
That's who Orson Welles was. Very tongue-in-cheek, very unapologetic, very good-hearted, and well-intentioned, but with enough hubris to have no patience for anyone who lashed out instead of being able to laugh at themselves. So I guess the moral of this story is relax, have fun, be happy, do your homework, don't panic. But if you do panic and end up acting like a fool, laugh at yourself. Move on with your life, because there will be truly terrible things that we all have to go through in this life. Tragic losses and roadblocks that you didn't expect and you didn't plan for. Times where life feels so hard you don't even know what to do next.
Fucking A right.
And you can't always find someone to blame for it.
Well, yeah, I can.
Sometimes it just happens and you're going to have to cope. We all have to cope with these things. And we can't make ourselves feel better by shifting these negative emotions to somebody else.
But
and in the space between these hard times, don't make mountains out of molehills. Lighten up. Enjoy life.
Don't tell me what to do.
Take every opportunity to smile and laugh. Make fun of yourself. Love yourself. Love your family. You will be happier. I promise.
Or your money back.
Just don't take yourself so goddamn seriously. I mean, seriously. None of us are getting out of this life alive.
Die.
So,
sorry.
There we are. That's my story.
And that was a lot of fun.
That was fun. I really enjoyed telling this story.
Let's gather ourselves and let's talk about it on the other side of this thing.
Mrs. Scriptkeeper brought the storytelling thunder, didn't she? Let's talk about it.
So that was fun. That was really cool. I didn't know that much about Orson Welles, but it's...
You know, it's funny.
I'd
been hearing I heard a lot about Orson Welles when I was a kid, but it was always my mom bringing him up. I never really watched anything that he was in.
You've never seen Citizen Kane?
Mm-mm.
We should watch that together.
Oh, I don't even know what it's about.
It's very good. It's very interesting. It's about all sorts of corruption and...
Oh, wow.
Very thoughtful movie.
I think Mom, part of it was because I was born on Orson Welles' birthday. And so, you know, it's kind of funny. I see parallels in my childhood and Orson Welles' childhood between the piano and the art, the acting.
They threw you in all that stuff.
I had dance and other things too, but it's kind of interesting. But I didn't really know a lot about his history, so researching this was fun for me.
You know what else you have in common with him? You did something and then you wrecked America. Because you did it.
What did I do?
I don't know.
How did I wreck America?
You're probably doing it right now. I don't know. No, maybe not. Maybe that's not a similarity.
What? But I told people to lighten the fuck up.
Scratch that last thing.
Lighten up.
No, I like how you went. We just went through this thing and then it got real deep in the last couple minutes. It was just like, whoa.
Sorry.
I just thought about myself and how I want to change my life for the better, man. So
I can't help it. I get weird sometimes.
Well, I thought that was really valuable, helpful shit there.
Thank you. I just started digging. I had a bunch more, but I got rid of it. I'm like, no, this is... Stop it, Monique. You're not everyone's mother.
Right. Well,
stop momming the listeners.
Fair. They're like, no, please don't. We like that.
Please don't mom us.
One thing, I said this in the show already, but I wrote this in my notes because I thought this was kind of interesting. Because we're kind of torn. Mm-hmm. Like a long time ago, not that long ago, but the propaganda worked for everybody. Where even like the conspiracy world and all the people into mind control and shit. Mm-hmm. They're like, War of the Worlds. Fucking look what it did. The power of media fucking screwed over the entire eastern seaboard. And it's like, no, it didn't.
Right.
Then the other spectrum is it didn't do anything.
Do you know?
A couple people got hurt.
Do you know
Lady fell down the stairs.
Who screwed over the entire eastern seaboard? Actually, the entire U.S.
government
was print media.
Oh, the media government.
It was the print media.
No shit. And they did it for decades, actually.
Well, they did it to discredit radio.
Right.
And when you listen to what Orson Welles said at the end there, he says radio is new.
Yeah.
We don't know the effects it's going to have on people. Now let's take that and bring it into the modern day. The internet is new.
Well, there was video killed the radio
right.
star.
I mean, all of these things.
Well, that was kind of the idea when the printing press was first invented, too, that it would ruin human memory. And they might be right.
Oh.
Who knows how right these people are, too? Because we're just looking at it like, fucking A, this is our culture. This is what we do. We do internet, and that's good for us. Fuck yeah. But maybe it's not good for us.
Right.
It's hard to say. We don't know. But we don't want it to be bad for us because we're doing it.
Right.
And we kind of instinctively know it's bad for us. But as the mediums change from, oral history to writing and to printing to the radio to TV to the internet to virtual reality.
Right, VR.
Every single pathway has been fought by a generation of people who are like, no, I didn't learn it that way. The kids are going to be smarter than me and fuck them kids. Whatever it is, I don't know.
Well, the old always shits on the new. We talked about that too.
Yeah, every generation's like real suspect. And there should be some of that because
to be fair,
kids can be taught to eat their parents. They can.
That's been proven.
A couple times it's happened,
but
not a lot.
To be fair, I am in a lot of ways when it comes to VR. Actually, not a lot.
Get off my
all the
internet.
ways. I'm like, fuck that. I ain't doing that. I will not do that.
Right.
So it's it's part of my mindset.
I won't do
right.
that.
I'm like, no. And of course, Zach keeps bringing it up. He's like, eventually you're gonna have to. I'm like,
you won't be able to pay your bills.
I will move out to the woods.
How are you gonna pay your
I'll
bills?
live off of fucking crickets.
If you don't,
I don't care.
If you don't inject nanobots into your butthole, you're not gonna be able to pay your bills. Okay.
You got to draw a line in the sand somewhere, and I guess that's fine.
How are you gonna check your stock market portfolio if you don't inject the nanobots?
I will pack up my cat, my
butthole.
dog, and I don't know. I'll move to the woods.
I get to visit you? Is that the deal?
If that's what
I'll
you would
bring
like.
you some crackers that you like from the store.
If it's between me being forced to put on VR bullshit and living an actual real life, I choose real life.
Why do you say it's
woods.
an actual real life? Your actual real life, you shouldn't have good vision at all. And your body should hurt more than it does.
Well, my body hurts pretty goddamn bad, and I don't know where my glasses are right now.
Well, okay, fair enough. So you're kind of raw dogging life a little bit more than normal. But I mean, we use a lot of technology to enhance our lives that we kind of take for granted now. Like, it magically, no matter what, when you walk into a room, you just put your hand towards a wall with very few exceptions, and there will be a device that will illuminate the entire room. We take that for granted.
Do we?
We're just like, meh. Yeah, you do. Especially
I
you.
do?
I don't fucking know. I mean, your life is supposed to be, you're not supposed to see as good as you can because the glasses make it so you can see better. So you're cheating already. You might as well cheat and imagine if you don't like virtual reality, imagine how nice it would be to have augmented reality where you just put your glasses on instead of just being a deviceless thing that makes you see better, just a simple thing. It also gives you would you like to learn more about this particular thing? It leads to this company's website or it leads to a Wikipedia page about this. And it's very intuitive. So you're just like, you use ESP basically, and you click with your dumb brain, and it clicks, and then you go okay, and then and then an Apache helicopter comes, and you turn your head, and it fires, and I don't know what I'm talking about again.
Yep.
Yep. She's looking at me like, I don't care about any of this shit.
I don't.
You don't. So you're out in your garden, and you're like,
really,
what plant is this? What weed is this? And it shows you, and you're like, no, I don't want that.
You know what?
What?
I know what they all are.
Well,
I don't need that. I do. I do.
All right, well, imagine you're not you, and somebody's out in the garden, and they're like, should I kill this thing, or should I eat it? Or should
I mean, there are times when maybe, I know what everything is out there, but maybe there will come a time where something, maybe a bird drops a seed, and something new pops up.
Okay, so that's your expertise. Now imagine you're sitting at a job, and you've got a job, and they've got new software for you and stuff, and it's between a computer, and you've got to do some stuff in the real world, and you got these glasses on, and it shows you what keys to use.
I don't want
and
them.
It shows you where to put the thing.
I would rather just research like normal.
Oh God.
I don't
see, and that's why we're gonna have to. That's why we're not growing economically. It's because we're fighting the productivity. We need to double that, triple it.
I don't know if you guys.
Is your ROI okay? How's your portfolio?
I'm not entirely sure if you guys are picking up on this, but we have had this conversation probably 15 times this year alone.
She don't like robots.
No, I don't.
She thinks robots are a bad idea.
You know, maybe it might be partly my obstinance. Maybe it's my stubborn nature.
That's what we're talking about. Each generation fights the things of the next.
No, I'm fighting you.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
You know, half the time it's like he's so fighting so he just wants me to agree with him.
Oh, well, that's fair.
He really does. He wants me to agree with him.
And I want you to know that you're wrong.
Oh, that's fine.
And I need you to succumb to the wrongness of you're wrong.
I think
and then
you
come to the light that is what I am, which is correct.
I think you're being totally incorrect.
No, we need robots to wipe our asses, and we need sex robots, and we also need robot overlords.
You need all those things
to tell us what to do.
I am perfectly happy wiping my own ass and harvesting my own vegetables. I'm happy.
And you just want me to have sex with you for the rest of your life.
I don't want a robot.
You want me?
Yes.
Weird. Okay. If you say so. How am I doing, guys? All right.
Obviously really well.
Yeah, I guess so. Hey. All right. Fuck yeah, robots. Take that one. Me 1, robots 0. All right. Well, fair enough.
Yeah.
Fuck them robots.
Well, anyways, I don't want to fuck the robots.
Don't fuck the robots. But fuck them in the weird sense, in the colloquial sense.
Colloquial?
Colloquial.
Anyways, back to the topic. The old always shits on the new.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it works. And I guess I'm the old shitting on the new. Watch
out, kids.
I'm honestly not interested in that stuff.
That's okay.
But I don't want to legislate against it. I just don't want to be forced against my will to ever do anything in this life.
It doesn't seem
or
like...
I don't even want to be oddly and failingly manipulated to agree to something that I don't agree with.
I get it.
You know,
okay.
I don't want those things.
Well, this has happened a lot of generations. Hopefully they'll be soft with us, with you. Hopefully the kids that are going to be running the show when you're older will be soft with you when you're like, I don't know if I want to adapt this thing. They're not going to be like, you must or you won't pay your bills.
I'll fucking take...
We're going to throw you in a dumbass place.
I'll fucking poison myself.
No.
Before I allow them to control me.
Sweet Jesus.
I will.
Well, imagine...
95, I'll be like, see ya, I've done enough.
Well, imagine the transformation of a life that was born in like 1950, the boomers. You know, they... basically have gone, their whole childhood was without computers and was, you know, they were the part of the generation that like sprung computers into the world in a sense. And then they watched the whole thing, and then now towards the end of their lives they're like, you have to use all this shit that you had no training on, and it's not intuitive to you, although they were part of the beginning stages and stuff, but that's not the same because you got to use it to, I mean, little kids that don't know how it works can use it better than you, and you know how it works, but whatever. I don't know. I mean, they went through that, what you're saying, that you're like, nope. Because it's like, now to pay your bills, you can't use the little dollar that your dad taught you about. You don't want the folding money, not that you know. Now it's like, now I have to put a password in, and I need 60 different passwords, and I need to fucking...
The way I understand all the things you're saying right now. However, in my opinion, life is voluntary.
Right.
My life.
Whoa, shit.
It is. I am here, and I choose to be here every day.
All right.
And that's my choice.
I'm glad you do.
So, and it's voluntary to me.
And if they make me wear a fucking...
No, if I get to the point where I am forced beyond, if I'm forced against my will, and my choices are taken away, and my I don't know, my freedom is taken away, whatever little freedom I may have at that time, and I am demeaned and criticized, looked down upon, and not respected in any way, fuck that. I ain't sticking around.
Well, shit.
I won't.
All right.
And it will be a happy day for me because I'm like, bye, bitches. I'm out of here.
And on your tombstone, it will say, here lies a woman of principle.
Here lies an obstinate bitch.
All right. Well, I hope it doesn't come to that. And you know
what?
It's going to be the market that chooses that. It's just going to be the majority of people are like, no, like just with the internet. They're like, the majority of people now shop on the internet. Mm-hmm. You can still go to the store.
I shop on the internet. There's things that and I don't want to say I succumb to. I have accepted them.
Right.
And I enjoy them. And if I accept and enjoy things along the way, of course I'm going to fold in. But it's more of when my choices are taken away.
Right. Nobody wants to do that. I don't. Well, there's a lot of people that think that they know better than you for your life.
Well, and I'm watching it happen where they're like, you don't even know what you're talking about
yourself and your world and what you want.
No, this is not what you're saying. This is what you're saying. It's like, absolutely, that's not at all what I was saying.
I know.
It was like, yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. I know better than you what you're trying to say.
It's weird. People
so fucking frustrating.
I know we're kind of going off the path here, but people kind of give themselves like predictive ability and ESP about other people. It's like what they really meant was what I think.
Well,
it's like
because we're talking about media right now, this is why we're on this topic.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's getting frustrating.
There's so many things about media. Yeah.
It's been frustrating.
Yeah, it has. I mean, propaganda's been going on for a long time, but now it's so silly.
Yeah.
It's really, really absurd. And it's supposed to be absurd.
Well,
it's supposed to make you question your sanity. That's part of like the propaganda.
It doesn't matter which direction you look. It's all along the horizon. I mean, everywhere you look, it's fucking absurd.
It is.
And it's very frustrating.
Well, every society seeks to reproduce itself. Yeah. And so that's how we do it, is we bombard our children with the values that we think are the things that are making it work for us. And whether or not we're right or not, that's very, very, that's inconsequential. It's basically, most of the things that we humans do are faith-based and on real thin ice. And I think the people in charge, there shouldn't be people in charge. And the world is showing us that the idea of a few people being able to look at the world's problems and diagnose technical things through their own just expertise and wisdom. It's like, or even their own selected experts and their expertise and wisdom. It's like, that's just not possible. There's too much.
Well, see, I think that goes against the grain of my personal, I guess, morality. I don't want to be controlled by anyone. And I don't want to control anyone. I don't want that responsibility.
Right.
For one. And two, I wouldn't know what the fuck to do with that.
Right. Everyone has to admit, it's like, I barely have an idea of I
barely know what I want.
Yeah.
Right.
But the idea of me telling you what you should be doing with society is really, it's such an interesting leap that a lot of people make. A lot of people
I guess maybe it's me.
Love that shit.
Maybe it's me holding too high of a standard for other people. Maybe a lot of people would look at it that way. It's like, well, you don't want to be controlled and you don't feel that you can control others, but I know what, but I can.
Right.
And that's, I don't know. I think that's terrible. I think it's an awful way to think about things.
Yeah. But we're kind of at the mercy of people that think that way,
right,
because a lot of them see this one mechanism that is government.
Yeah, well.
And they're like, well, I want that because that's how I can enact the things against the people. And it seems more and more so, and it depends on where you live in the world, but government always kind of uses, one side uses it to kind of punish the other side.
I thought you were going to say something about the media.
Nah, we'll save that for another one, I guess.
Yeah. Since that's what the topic is.
I know, I had to go. Well, government and media are basically, at this point in the United States, the media basically does the promotion for government.
Yeah.
And with very little exception, with some little dissenters here and there. But the
mainstream media.
Back in the day, in Orson Welles' time, there was a little bit more. I mean, it's propaganda as well. But at least they had reporters would go to the White House and they would do reporting, and they would have to find little ins and outs. They'd have to find a source and stuff and learn about stuff, and they do investigative reporting, and that's how they'd find out stuff about the White House. Now the White House or the Congress or whatever, they have this press conference, and they tell the press exactly what they want the press to know, and depending on whose team the press is on, which there's only two to really consider, they just repeat that to us.
Right.
With very little, and of course there's always opinion-based stuff and all those kind of things, but it's just a different kind of, we watch at the media now, despite the fact that media is this huge giant, they've reduced the amount of investigative reporting. I mean, all those shows that were popular back in the day are gone. They might still exist on TV or whatever, but the idea, you think they would expand where it's like, investigative this, is this true, is this true? No, most of the 24-hour news is like, Congressman blah, blah, blah said this, and then Congressman Dipshit said this in response, and that's the news, and so that's what facts are, and during like the last couple of years, we've seen how people that challenge that are dismissed on their head without even us knowing anything about their argument or da-da-da. So I don't know my point. It is a weird climate to live in, but it's not new. This is something that human beings, it's new, the technology, but the concepts of being manipulated and not knowing if you're living in reality. Propaganda, like I said, is meant to, you either buy into it wholeheartedly, and that's kind of like, hey, let's go find, forgive me, the dum-dums, and they'll buy into the propaganda, the real simple shit that annoys the fuck out of most people. They'll buy into that, and they're like, okay, that's for them. For the rest of the folk that aren't dummies, the majority of folks, it makes you feel like you're fucking crazy. I mean, that's what they did in a lot of the Soviet countries when they used propaganda. I studied Mao, and that's what they did, is they wanted to throw you off the things that you stand on. They want to make you feel, insecure there. And you do. When you look at the news in the United States today and you go, fucking, that makes no sense. But my brain, I learned this in first grade, and then they're like, no, you didn't. And so gaslighting, all these things are part of propaganda. I don't know. It's a weird world. And it's weird to admit that we're living in a very highly propagandized time, because propaganda comes with agenda. And it's not always just like winning the election. Some people want to win the culture and stuff like that. And then I get my tinfoil hat on, and then I get kicked off the island. I'll start swimming. Fuck me. Whatever. All right. Edit all that out. I don't care. You guys don't need to know what I pontificate about in behind closed doors. But this was fun. I'm going to keep going unless we stop now. So, and I don't even know what I'm talking about at this point. But thank you guys for listening.
Yes.
Visit us at SKATCAST.com for tons of extra stuff, content, merch, ways to get in touch with us, all the different things. Patreon.com/SKATCAST is a place to support us. If you'd like to make me do a cartwheel, that happens each time when you guys sign up, and it happens all the time, so I'm getting pretty good at cartwheels. But more helps. We are always happy to have more in our little box. Lots of turds, lots of room for turds. Thank you to our trusted turd triad, three particular turds that have taken a lot of their personal time to support what we do.
Yeah, and Bodhi actually helped me name this episode.
Nice.
Yeah, so I threw it out there, and the three of them threw stuff around, and yeah, it was great. So thank you to them, the triad, for assisting me in this process, and for Bodhi for throwing a couple of words out there that really worked for me.
Heck yeah, Bodhi the Quartermaster. And we've got some of his research coming up.
Yes, we do.
A few in the can, in the hopper. Also, Don, the Shitbox Wizard.
Yep.
Awesome human being out there, busy busting his ass to promote, to spread, to smear.
Smear the scat.
Chris, the Discord Dookie Slayer, in there causing trouble and keeping the Discord Dookie shit fucking in place.
Yep.
Doing what he does. And I'm proud to have all three of them. They're kick-ass turds. Also to the Godhead for, they are pretty badass as well. And they're a time suck based thing, but they do magic on that.
They're
internet.
Fun.
They are.
Yeah.
And to Alan at the garbage disposal, find the kitty butthole in the food.
I found
That's what
it
he played the other day.
I think it was steak. It was yesterday. I think it was a steak yesterday. That was fun.
That was fun. But thank you for all your help. It's fun to watch the garbage disposal grow. Nice little community in there as well of a bunch of lovely human beings. So, yeah, thank you guys, everyone.
Well, there's also Paul Folks.
Oh, yeah.
He recently did an episode.
We've got to talk about.
Yes.
It's called the Phantasmagoric Oddities Emporium, I think.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
But it's Poe.
Yeah.
And it's a fantastic, and I've been talking to him for weeks and weeks. Like, I want to promote your show, dude. You're good at what you do.
Yeah.
And it's got Scatcast vibes on some level. Like, he does some funny shit with voices and stuff. But
nice.
He's just got a really awesome, distinct voice and great storyteller. And I think he did a War of the Worlds.
See, I didn't know that
I think
he did. Okay.
I haven't had a chance to listen to his podcast as much as I'd like to, because I
didn't know that he had done the War of the Worlds. But when I was doing this research, you were like, "Hey, Paul just did something like this." So
if you want to keep it in the family and you want to listen to the entirety of War of the Worlds, but redone by family, Paul Folks.
Yeah.
Phantasmagoric Oddities Emporium.
Nice.
I think they're on like episode 5 or 6, and
cool.
Yeah, and give them some love on the places where love is
love is
possible.
givable. Yeah,
get on the Spotify's and the stuff, and you can do that for us too. I never asked that, like rate and review. I don't care if you do that. It helps us, I guess, but I don't know how it helps.
It drives the ratings up on the show on the individual platforms.
I don't want everybody to know. It's our little club. It's all right. I mean, as long as I can eat from most days, I don't really care. Like, I'm having so much fun.
Yeah.
So, but I would, if I could eat for sure, like next week, if I knew I could eat for sure next week, I'd feel better. But
the higher the ratings, the more it's spread, basically.
I don't care.
The more people can hear it.
Fuck it. Most of the people like other things. They can listen to the things they like. We'll listen to the things that we do here, and we'll just be the crazy little fringe.
All right.
Well, thank you for the awesome research.
Oh, yeah.
Script. That was fun, and all the audio clips that you put together and
thank
shit.
You.
Thank you for that presentation. And thank you for the nice words about me and Orson Welles. I caught that you were being sweet.
I saw some parallels while I was doing this research because they're there and they're blatant.
Well, the crazy stuff.
They're blaring.
They're obvious. He was a crazy person. I'm a crazy person. One difference is he had a lot of money, and boy, oh boy, you know how to pick them when it comes to financial guys. I'm killing it. Killing it. All right. We're very thankful you guys listen.
Yes.
And as always, we'll talk at you in the future.
And it'll seem like the present.
Good fucking bye.
Bye.
Dipshit Files.
Bing bong.
I got nothing.
My voice hurts.